Welcome, everybody. John Aravosis here with the Aravosis Report. How's everybody doing today? I'm going to adjust my lighting as I'm talking to you. Maybe there. Good enough. Good enough. How's everybody doing? It's Wednesday, January 4th. Welcome. We've got a good amount of Ukraine news today. Also going to talk about, we can go to the Discord and do an after show again, talking about the votes in the Congress today, the ongoing mayhem there. Let me start my TikTok here, and then we'll get things rolling. Hello, Norway. There we go. There we go. Wales, exactly. Give a little shout out where you guys are at. Hello, TikTokers. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. We'll wait a minute, as always, here. Still debating if this light is bright enough. I think I want a little bit brighter. Oh, Mom's dog is making her appearance. Come on in. Come on. Get in here. Come on. We're trying to shut Mom's dog up here. Come on. Come in here. There you go. There you go. Okay. Oh, boy. There we go. Mom's dog Kukla is making her appearance. Thank you, Carlos, for the gift there. Oh, I think she's going to be a chatty one today. Mom's little dog. Hello, Liverpool. Debbie. Oh, my. Anyway, hey, TikTokers. Just waiting for a few more of you guys to join us before we get rolling. We always start with people saying where you're all hailing from. So, yeah, hi, Mom's dog. Mom's dog is named Kukla. Okay, she's in her little bed now, so there's a chance she's going to calm down. We shall see. We shall see. You never know with Kukla. Oh, my. Sasha, my dog's sleeping next to me on the chair, so... All right, TikTokers, I think we've almost got a critical mass of you guys here, and we will begin. All right, welcome, everybody. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. This is my daily show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine. Using my policy background, my legal background, my foreign policy background. I've been working in this field for 30-plus years now, a variety of political fields, and giving you guys my take on what's going on, and hopefully we learned something. So the way this works is first half of the show or so, I will go over the news of the day. And the second half of the show, I will take your guys' questions, your comments, your analysis of what's going on. On TikTok, you guys can submit questions. And by the way, you can do it any time during the show. Feel free to submit questions even now. I'll get to them eventually. Oh, thank you, Cindy. But submit your questions via my profile in the link that says Q&A on TikTok. The rest of you obviously can use the super chat questions or the chat questions at the bottom. I do appreciate your gifts. I'm doing this for free and I'm doing it full time. So your guys' gifts are actually helping me pay the bills and keep going. So I appreciate it. Please keep going if you can. And let's keep rolling. So thank you for the gifts on TikTok and thank you for the gifts on YouTube. Let's get rolling, guys. So, the big news today is that France is going to be sending, and there's going to be a definitional problem here. France is going to be sending light tanks to Ukraine. Now, there is a big battle, there always is, in the defense community as to whether a light tank even exists or not, whether this is an armored fighting vehicle or a tank or both. But bottom line is a lot of the defense folks are calling them light tanks. Thank you, Matthew, for that. This is a big deal. Let me tell you exactly what the French are going to be sending. They're going to be sending the AMX-10 RC armored combat vehicle. It is a French weapon that is apparently outdated now. I mean, for France, they've got a new replacement that they're phasing in, and France is going to be sending a number of its older vehicles to the Ukrainians. Now, what is good about that is apparently this is still a very good vehicle. It's not really a negative that France is sending, an older vehicle to Ukraine, because keep in mind that what the Russians have, some of the Russian equipment goes back to the 1950s, right? So getting a French weapon from the last couple decades, that's pretty damn good. Now, let me tell you a little bit more here. Actually, Otan Bot just weighed in. I was hoping some of you who know the AMX-10, the French weapon, would weigh in a little, because I will tell you briefly, from the defense folks I am reading, they seem to think this is a big deal, that this is actually a very good thing the French are sending. I will tell you before I get into a little more detail from Otan Bot as to what the weapon actually is, the actual light tank the French are sending. The Americans, you may recall, Bloomberg reported, I think it was on Friday, a couple days ago, that the Biden administration is considering sending the Bradley fighting vehicle to Ukraine. And at the time I said, considering. I don't consider a report that they're considering to be very significant. I'm considering being a millionaire. What does that actually mean? The good news, and I do think this is a good sign, President Biden was asked about it today, and he said, yes, we are looking into it. Now, that's a good deal. That's a good deal. If Biden, here's the thing. If this decision was not even something Biden was really, really seriously thinking about, when he gets asked the question publicly, he would have gone, that's, thank you, Tattooed, for that. I appreciate that. Wave, the wave for the whale. We got our first whale of the day. But if it were something Biden really weren't thinking of very seriously, when he got asked about it, he would have downplayed it. He wouldn't have said, yes, we are thinking about it very seriously. That's a good sign. That's a very good sign. Now, the U.S. is going to be announcing another weapons package to Ukraine in the coming days. That just got announced today. It just got announced today that the package will be announced, that there's one coming up. If this were a part of it, that would be great. Now, one thing that's really good about this, the fact that France is doing this, and again, that this is considered a light tank by many of the military experts. This is the first NATO country to send a weapon like this to Ukraine. Thank you, Zoe, for the hat. To send a weapon like this to Ukraine, that establishes a precedent. It not just establishes a precedent, it does something, and I've told this before to those of you who have studied political science, but there's a concept in political science called the Overton window. And the idea behind the Overton window is this window, this universe of what is considered acceptable, okay? Like acceptable behavior. And when somebody pushes the limits and does something outside of that window, it ends up potentially expanding the window so that other people say, hey, maybe I can do that too. Now, in politics, a lot of times, corruption, for example, can feed that window. So you could have a politician that is incredibly corrupt and other politicians see it and say, hey, he got away with it. I can do it too. So the Overton window on corruption expands. In this case, you've got the Overton window on sending tanks to Ukraine. Nobody has done it yet, okay? It is a big deal. And by France doing it, it opens the window to America doing it. There has been a big debate going on with Germany over several months now on whether, is it the Gepard 2 tank, I believe, but whether the light tank, again, whether the Germans will send these. By France doing it, it expands, it makes it more acceptable. Because also part of what's happening, I would argue, part of what's happening here, I think this is also a bit of a trial balloon. And I think NATO maybe had agreed on doing this. Rather than America doing it and sending the Bradleys first, like announcing the Bradleys, they decide to have France do it first and have France do it with a weapon that we don't hear about as much in order to basically test the Russians and see how crazy will the Russians respond. And frankly, if the Russians don't respond very crazily, then this would be another red line that basically Putin has set that when we crossed it, he didn't care. Let me tell you really quick. So Otanbot was weighing in on the French weapons. Now, I see we had a sudden influx of folks on TikTok. Just to let you guys know what we're talking about. We're talking about France announced today, and President Zelensky backed it up and said, thank you, McFadge, for the hat, that they are going to be sending light tanks to Ukraine. And this is a big deal since these weapon systems have not previously, thank you, Jamie, have not previously been sent to Ukraine by anybody in NATO. So the fact that the French are doing it is now making it okay for everybody else in NATO to do it too, which is a big deal. Now, Otanbot was just weighing in to tell us more about the system. Thank you for the crown there. The AMX-10 is equipped with a variety of weapons, including a turret-mounted 105 millimeter or 120 millimeter cannon. Okay, a lot of this is detailed stuff. It has a crew of 3. I had read that it had a crew of 4, unless I'm thinking the Bradley, but I thought it said 4, but 3 or 4. It can carry up to 8 additional infantry soldiers, designed to be highly mobile, has a top speed of around 60 kilometers an hour or 37 miles per hour. I also read that it's on wheels. I believe it's on 6 wheels rather than treads. And that can make it very mobile and very agile, apparently, which could be really useful as well for fighting in Ukraine. Anyway, this is a big deal. I'm excited about it. It's a very big deal in terms of what we've been hearing. Let me move on, and maybe we can have I'm just looking here. Boop, 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 boop. All right, let me move on with this, and then we can have a bigger discussion about this tank coming from the French in our discussion after the show. Our discussion period, not after the show. Second half of the show where we get into the Q&A, I'd like to hear you guys weigh in more about this tank. So what else going on? Some polling data out today that was very good, showing that the U.S., thank you, Johns, for that, or JOS for that, some polling data showing that Americans and Europeans are both still very strongly supporting Ukraine. The European number was around 74% of Europeans saying that they continue to support, or they continue to wish their government to support Ukraine. That's a good number, 74%. I'm sorry, you know what? I forgot to say, Professor weighed in on TikTok and said, how many tanks? We don't know how many yet are coming from the French. That is a big deal that has yet to be determined. So that's a very good question there. We don't know how many. If it's one, it's not a big deal. If it's 10, 20, then you're, 30, you're talking a much better thing. So the poll. So the Europeans, 74% support their governments continuing to support Ukraine. The Americans were 73%, which is very good, actually. I mean, when you get to numbers that high in polling, that's very good. I know you might think, why isn't it 90%? Yeah, I'm with you. I wish it were 90%. But when 74% of the American people or the European people support something like this, that's a really good deal. That's a very good deal. Now, thank you for the hat, Andrew. The American polling was particularly interesting. Now, we hear about certainly the MAGA side of the Republican Party has been problematic with Ukraine because Donald Trump is not a supporter of Ukraine. Donald Trump tends to be a supporter of Vladimir Putin, and his MAGA supporters have done the same thing. Republicans overall have been much better than the MAGA wing, which is good. Here's the thing. The 73% of Americans that support continuing to support Ukraine, the actual question was, for the American side, the actual question was, do you, I'm going to use the word support twice. Do you support, thank you for the heart there, do you support continuing to support Ukraine, even though the Russians have threatened to use nuclear weapons? And the response from Americans was 73% saying, yes, we continue to support Ukraine. Now, that was really interesting to me. Because when you consider how much Putin and his coterie, his entourage, has threatened to use nukes against us, I thought throwing nuclear weapons into the question for Americans would make the question plummet. Because you're kind of saying, right, do you support Ukraine even if you're hinting, even if it means nuclear war in essence? And when Americans were told that, they said, no, we support Ukraine. In other words, the threats from Putin, if anything, they're not working. And I almost wonder if they're backfiring a little. Whether Americans heard that threat and said, excuse me, you're going to threaten us? I'm not going to change my mind because you're going to threaten us. Thank you, Inspired Woman, for the cat scratch there. So I thought that was pretty cool. The head of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate said in an interview with ABC News that Ukraine is planning a major offensive in the spring, a major attack. Now, we've got to keep in mind that I don't want to say Ukraine lies, because I don't think they lie. But you've got to keep in mind that Ukraine is saying this on purpose, okay? So the fact that Ukraine is saying this means we've got to think of who their audience is. Their audience is the Russians, I suspect. It could be all of us, but I suspect it's the Russians. It's also the Ukrainian people, right? They want to send a message to their own people that, hey, we've got stuff in the works, hang in there. We're not just sitting here, we've got plans coming. But the Ukrainians have been really, really, really good. Yeah, America never threatened nukes even once. Brian, you're about to go away. Actually, Brian, you are going away. Somebody get rid of that Brian Ismay guy. He's a troll. He was claiming America threatened nuclear weapons first. America hasn't threatened nuclear weapons once, because that wouldn't fly here, because we're not crazy people and we're not immature people politically. I mean, that's just that. If the Russians have been threatening it nonstop, because unfortunately you're dealing with an immature political culture, which is scary considering they've got big weapons for being so immature. In any case, we were talking about the spring offensive. So the Ukrainians have been thank you, Sig Sauer. The Ukrainians have been very effective at deflecting, at tricking the Russians into thinking what they were going to do. At one point, the Ukrainians, actually, I'll even get out my little map and show you guys. At one point, the Ukrainians had convinced the Russians that they were, so they convinced, the Russians were convinced that the Ukrainians were going to invade somewhere around, mind you, okay, all of this territory still held by Russia. The Russians were convinced the Ukrainians were going to invade with a massive offensive around here and also down here. So what did the Russians do? The Russians moved a ton of their troops and a ton of their weapons from over here where there was a big battle going on. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Happy Beach family. I appreciate that. There was a big battle going here, and the Russians moved a ton of their troops and a ton of their weapons down here. This was several months ago because they were convinced the Ukrainians were going to be attacking down here. So what did the Ukrainians do? They attacked up here. This was that big offensive the Ukrainians had around Kharkiv when the really big one several months ago. Oh, thank you, Big Drama. Appreciate that. The really big one several months ago when the Ukrainians just went wild, right? Oh, a twofer from Big Drama. Thank you. Thank you for that. When the Ukrainians just pushed across here and basically pushed the Russians out of this entire area. And that was the big story several months ago when we all were hearing, wow, the Ukrainians went on this big push. That battle was one that they tricked the Russians, and they tricked the Russians into thinking they were going to be fighting somewhere else. So the Russians removed a ton of their troops somewhere else, and then the Ukrainians attacked anyway where they were. And the Russians had diminished their own capacity. So when you hear the Ukrainians say they're going to invade, have a big offensive in the spring, maybe they are, but the Ukrainians are very good at tricking the Russians. So let's see what happens. Finally, before I get to the next segment of news here, there were explosions heard overnight in Sevastopol in occupied Crimea. Sevastopol is the port city down here. Crimea is the Ukrainian territory that the Russians invaded and stole in 2014. Sevastopol all the way down here, and major Russian port. Thank you, Big Drama, for those. Those were very cool for the air balloons. Big port here for the Russian Navy, and there were some explosions heard overnight. Who knows? Who knows? But it looks like the Ukrainians are continuing to build the battle or to bring the battle to the occupied territories, which is great. Oops, sorry, my allergies are kicking in. Quick reset, just to remind folks who I am or anybody who's new. I am John Aravosis. Oh, missed Super Chat. Okay. Oh, that's right. I did miss the Super Chat. Let me pull it up. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. It is my nightly show Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, Carla, for the glasses. 6 p.m. Eastern, where I talk about the latest news from Ukraine for about half an hour or so, and then take your guys' questions for the second half. I do appreciate your gifts. Please keep them coming. I'm doing this for free and doing it full time, so your gifts help support my work and keep me going. I do have a Patreon set up, and I always say, if you've been following my work for a few months now and you like it, maybe go over to the Patreon and see if you guys can help out. Patreon is a really neat way that you can basically go and contribute, a couple dollars, $5, whatever a month to different creators, and it'll automatically bill you. And then of course you can cancel whenever you want, but it's a nice way to support folks if you can. Thank you, Annie. And it's also nice, I will say, as a creator, and I'll stop with my pitch here, but as a creator, it's nice because you actually know how much money you're getting each month, and it makes it easier to keep doing the work. Thank you. Thank you for the, not the heart. That was the confetti there. Thank you for that. All right, let me keep going here. So update on Makivka. Oh, as Patreon, I forgot to even tell you, patreon.com/Aravosis is the URL for my Patreon. Thank you, Marcy. Patreon.com/Aravosis. Or for TikTok, just go to my profile, click the link in my profile. It's all of my links there. All right, sorry, we had a question from Jake. I apologize for that, Jake. I'd even saved the question and then got wrapped up in the story here. 2 anti-aircraft missiles fall in Poland about a month ago. I thought it was 1, but whatever. I haven't heard much. That's true. We have not heard much. Ukraine has Patriot system. Ukraine is getting the Patriot system, not for 6 months, however. They are going to be getting the American Patriot, but because of the training it takes, the latest news was that they will not be getting it for 6 months. It'll be operational in 6 months. A channel for more private support. In terms of, you mean getting the Patriots? I don't think so. If you mean raising money for them, I don't think there's a way of doing that because these are American weapon systems and there's no way to really buy American. Let me rephrase this. The problem for getting American weapons isn't that Ukraine doesn't have enough money. It's that the Americans and NATO overall are very concerned, I think over concerned, but they're very concerned about giving too good of weapons to Ukraine, lest the Russians get upset and maybe Putin uses nuclear weapons or right something crazy like that. So it's not that Ukraine doesn't have enough money, and if we only raise the money, we could get them. It's America doesn't want to give these weapons to Ukraine. The Germans don't want to give light tanks to Ukraine. Exactly. Timothy's saying Polish MiGs. The Poles were willing to give their MiG fighter jets to Ukraine, and what happened? The Americans freaked out and the Germans freaked out. So the biggest problem you've got there isn't money. It's we are refusing to even give the weapons to Ukraine, let alone sell them. Thank you, Keith, for the TikTok thing there. So that's the issue there. So it wouldn't really help to raise money for the Patriots. As it currently stands, it's getting the approval for more systems to go. And so far, only one Patriot system has been approved to go to Ukraine. Let me see. Sorry, Jake had a little follow-up here. Would the missile have landed in Poland if it was the Patriot system? Could that even have led to the Patriot over to Ukraine? I don't know. My guess is going to be that a Patriot missile system should have, thank you, a dozen for the hat there. A Patriot missile system should have a much better self-destruct mechanism in it than an S-300, which are what the Ukrainians are currently using, which is a Russian, if not Soviet system. Right? It's a very old system. The Patriots are not exactly young, right? I think the Patriots pretty much go back to the 1980s. Certainly were they made in the 1980s, and they certainly were widely used in the 1990s. But because it's a good American system that has also been updated multiple times, I would not be surprised if you've got a much better. Now, let me rephrase this. The S-300 that the Ukrainians are using did have a self-destruct, but something didn't work, or it self-destructed, and still part of it came down. The destructed part came down in Poland. We still don't really know the details on it all, right? But I will guarantee you that the Patriot is going to have a much better self-destruct system, so that hopefully it wouldn't come down. And it's probably got a better guidance system. Not probably. It has to have a better guidance system than the S-300, so that you'd have much less of a chance of the Patriot going off course into Poland. That'd be my guess on that. Let me keep going. So I wanted to give you an update on Makivka. This story just keeps being very interesting. Excuse me. This is the story of, I sound like I'm telling a tale. This is the story of the recent Ukrainian attack in eastern Ukraine against the Russians, where they killed hundreds of Russian troops who were together basically in a dormitory of sorts on New Year's Eve, early hours of New Year's Day. Now, this happened in Makivka, which is a town just abutting next to Donetsk here in eastern Ukraine. Okay, I'll get a little closer. You can see it. Makivka is literally the eastern side of Donetsk, basically. And what we know happened, what we think we know, because the Russians are still investigating, is that the Russians, for crazy reasons, decided to put a bunch of the new recruits in the same sleeping quarters. They took a vocational school. So imagine like a school that apparently had sleeping quarters or something of it. The Russians put hundreds of their troops in there. The low end, some of the Russians are saying it was 350 or 400 troops that they had sleeping in there. The Ukrainians are saying they had upward of 700 troops in there. Not only were the Russians stupid enough on New Year's Eve to New Year's Day, overnight, to put hundreds of troops in the same barracks, okay, the same building. It wasn't on a military base. It was in a school in the middle of a town, a Ukrainian town that they were occupying. So what do you think was happening? A lot of the locals in the town, the Russians are now thinking, and it's probably true, a lot of the locals in the town knew exactly what was going on, right? So the locals in the town probably told Ukrainian intelligence, hey, we keep seeing literally hundreds of Russians coming in and out of this building, okay? Also being the geniuses that they are, the Russians put their troops within Highmars range, okay? Now, thank you, Riverside. Sorry, my nose is just itching terribly today. Thank you for that, Riverside. The Highmars, which is the rocket system we've given the Ukrainians, we've given them rockets that can shoot around maybe the maximum 60 miles or 100 kilometers. The Russians know this. The Russians should have known not to put several hundred troops within range of the Highmars. They did. Well, the last thing the Russians did, and this is what a dozen is mentioning on TikTok right now, from what we know, the Russians decided that they would either put next to the vocational school, or some stories are saying in the basement of the vocational school. The Russians thought it would be a really neat idea to store ammunition there. Thank you, Ben, for the boxing gloves. Thought it would be a great idea to store ammunition in the basement of this school. So what happens? The Ukrainians find out that there are several hundred Russian troops in this building. The Ukrainians may or may not have known that there's a huge Russian ammunition depot in the basement of the building. Also, the Russians being the brainiacs they are, there were, I believe, at least 10 military vehicles, which could have been tanks, it could have been personnel carriers, next to the building as well. First of all, because you want to make clear that everybody knows this is a military building, right? But also, if the building blows up, it means the vehicles blow up. So what happens? The Ukrainians attack with between, the latest reports are somewhere between 4 and 6 Highmars rockets. The rockets, Highmars being wonderful for, wonderfully precise for hitting things, right? The Highmars rockets hit, the building blows up, the ammunition catches fire, it blows up even bigger, and what happens? The Russians die. Now, the Ukrainians say that somewhere, thank you for the glasses, Jesse, that somewhere around 400 Russian soldiers died, 300 were injured. The Russian government is claiming 89 Russian soldiers died. Now, what is interesting about that is things are pretty bad if the Russian government is admitting that anybody died, right? The Russian government doesn't generally come public and say how many people died in some big attack. They just don't. It looks like the Russian government was very worried about this story because it was such a big attack that they were trying to get ahead of the story and basically spin it their way and say, only 89 men were killed. 89 being killed in an attack is huge. The Ukrainians say 400. What is interesting, a little update today, what's interesting about this is we are now hearing from the survivors. I suspect that some of the survivors are talking on their phones and the Ukrainians are intercepting the phones. What some of the survivors are saying is that meaning the Russian troops who survived, okay, that 200 Russians were killed, 200 troops were killed. I'm going to wipe my nose again. 150 were wounded. So that's pretty big numbers there. Their relatives are saying that, in fact, it wasn't their phones because the Russian government is trying to blame the troops themselves. Is trying to blame. James. Oh, here we go. Oh, actually, let me get to yours in a second, James. Okay. The Russian government is trying to claim that the troops brought it on themselves by using their cell phones. Thank you, Inspired Woman, for that. By using their cell phones, and the family and the survivors are now saying, no. We didn't use phones with SIM cards. The Russian government has military has some kind of a system, and I forget what it's called, Phoenix or something. Thank you, Krill. It's some kind of a Wi-Fi system, and they're saying that their phones were being used on the Wi-Fi system, and that therefore there was no way for the Ukrainians to actually see a bunch of cell phone signals in this area. Thank you, Annie, for the pause. What else was here? This was wild. Another survivor, so another Russian soldier who survived the attack says, listen to this, really horrible, says, and I see you, James, I'll get you in a sec, says, after the strike, after the attack, their commanders shouted at them. So these are the surviving troops, right? Their commanders shouted at them and said, take your shovels and everyone go to the front, meaning the ones of you who didn't die, pick up your shovels. We're sending you to the front. The front meaning the battle, like literally where the Ukrainians and the Russians are fighting, where all the bombing is taking place. The front is the line between the two troops. These guys just got blown up. Thank you, Big Drama, for the groundhog. These guys just got blown up. And I mean, horrific blown up. These buildings were destroyed. You are either sleeping or talking to relatives right after New Year's. The entire building blows up. The building's gone. People were were obliterated. I mean, the bodies, they're still trying to find the bodies because the bodies were just destroyed. It was that bad of an explosion. The troops who survived have got to be pretty freaked out. They were ordered to pick up shovels because they didn't have their guns anymore, because either the building collapsed around them, or reportedly a number of these Russian troops, like when the building was blowing up, they jumped out the windows. Like, what if they didn't die immediately? So it's not like you picked up your gun, right? Everything collapsed around you. Well, what happens? They don't have their guns. They don't have ammunition. They don't have any supplies. What do the Russians do? The Russian government told them, pick up your shovels and we are going to be taking you to the front line of fighting with the Ukrainians. Even without your weapons, without anything, you'll be digging trenches. So they sent these guys as a thank you, right, for them getting blown up. They sent them to the front with shovels and told them, you're going to be digging trenches at the front with the Ukrainians. Mind you, this is literally right after you were at a massive explosion where several hundred of your friends got blown up. And these are the new recruits. So these are people who are probably have no military experience and are not at all prepared for this. So it's like somebody like you or me, or I mean a civilian type, getting blown up, and then they say, good, now you're going to go to where all the fighting is and where all the explosions are and dig trenches. I was just going to say, PJ is saying on TikTok, digging your own graves. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's disgusting what they did. All right, James, sorry about that. Oh, Todd, thank you, Todd, for that, by the way. So James is saying, I remember reading that Ukraine was either staging a counteroffensive in Cremina. Did it stall, or has it yet to happen yet? The Russians, it's funny, I don't get them confused, but it always takes a second because there's two towns and two battles nearby in the east. Thank you, Big Drama, for the Big Drama Llama. Thank you for the llama there. In the east, you've got two main battles going on right now. One is for Bakhmut, which is, I finally really narrowed it down on my map. It's kind of right here, east of Kramatorsk, southwest of Severodonetsk, okay? So more or less where my finger is. Bakhmut is a Ukrainian-controlled town that the Russians are trying to take. The Russians have been pushing for 6 months, not doing well, and now the Russians are starting to go on the defensive because they're just not doing well. The other battle you've got going on is 50 to 60 miles to the north, which means 90, 100 kilometers to the north, and it's pretty much just above, here's Severodonetsk again, maybe where the Y is in Severodonetsk. So again, where my finger is here, they're both very close. One is here and one is here. That is Cremina. And Cremina and Svatove are two Ukrainian towns, just a very short distance from each other, north and south, important highway between them. And the Ukrainians have been fighting to take those towns back for a couple months now. And these are very, Bakhmut, not so important, to be honest. I mean, all the military experts are saying the Russians are out of their minds to be fighting as hard as they've been fighting for 6 months now to get the town of Bakhmut, because it just doesn't matter to that degree. The towns that do matter are Cremina and Svatove, which are the towns the Ukrainians are trying to get back from the Russians. If they get those towns, the Ukrainians, they will be in a really good position to basically cut off Russian supplies to their forces in the east. So really big deal. Now, as far as a counteroffensive in Cremina, I mean, from what I've seen, they're still fighting. I mean, I haven't really seen anything new on that. They're still fighting. They are advancing. I know, like I said, in Bakhmut, the Russian offensive stalled. The Ukrainians are still advancing. Not a lot's been happening every day. In the last day or two, there were some reports that highway between the two towns, between Cremina and Svatove in the north, and again, maybe a couple miles of this highway. This highway is super important, that the Ukrainians were, moving in on the highway, but and they were, I believe, in the suburbs of Cremina, but this is now a week ago. A week ago, we had heard that the Russians were moving a lot of their headquarters and their own people that they had moved in out of Cremina because they were getting worried. But I don't have anything more than that. I just haven't heard anything significant really happening. But I would say it is not stalled. I think we would have heard And we're not hearing that things are going badly in Cremina. That we are not hearing. We're hearing that the Ukrainians keep slowly advancing, and Bakhmut is where it's stalled, but it's stalled on the Russians. So that's the best I can tell you at this point. Let me, what do I got here? A couple more stories here. The general staff, this was another story to keep an eye on. 80 Russian soldiers were reportedly killed, according to the Ukrainians, or injured by Ukrainian strike on the Russian-occupied town of Tokmak, which is in Zaporizhia. I looked this one up too. Tokmak is more or less around here, okay? Again, occupied Ukrainian territory the Russians are occupying. The Ukrainians are saying that they made a strike that killed or injured 80 Russians, which again would be a big deal. And putting it on top of the strike the Ukrainians did in the East, this over New Year's, would just start to this is all a they're trying to kill the Russians, obviously, okay? I mean, that's the goal in war, right? But it's also a psychological game that they're playing. The Ukrainians are trying to freak the Russians out. One of the reports that I saw was one of the Russian soldiers who survived I didn't write it down, but I can tell you what it was, who survived the Ukrainian attack in Makivka, which is the attack where the Ukrainians killed several hundred Russian soldiers this weekend, okay, New Year's Day. And one of the Russians was saying, he said, basically, it's hell here. He goes, we're just getting killed. We don't know. The quote from him is, we don't even know why we're here. We don't even know why we're fighting. They aren't even telling us what to do, meaning they're not even getting orders to tell them what to do. And at the same time, they're blowing us up. And none of us want to be here. That is incredible intelligence. Hearing that kind of exactly what Amik is saying, they're freaked out. They're freaked out. And that kind of dispiritedness of the Russian troops does not make them very good fighters, because they're all terrified and they want to get the hell out of there. So all of these battles are about getting rid of the Russian troops, but also about freaking them out psychologically so that they don't fight as well, or they give up, right? Actually, one of the really interesting, I should have grabbed the video to show you guys. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense puts out a video 2 days ago. It's like an advertisement to the Russians. And the advertisement was a Ukrainian soldier standing. Hold on. I want to see if I can find this. Hold on. This was the most amazing thing. I'm sure I can find this just by Googling it. Hold on. I should have just grabbed the video. Oops. Let me find this. The Ukrainians do a video. If I can't find this, I'll describe it to you, but it's much better. Ministry of Defense. Here we go. I found it. Okay. This is the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. And they have a soldier. Hi, Kukla. I know. Hi, Kukla. Hello. Mom's dog is just standing on the other side of the room, barking at me for attention, as she is wont to do. Hey, come on. I know. Hi. Come on. Come on. If she keeps going, I may have to go in a second and just grab her, because it's the only way to get her to stop this. So in any case, the Ukrainians, I'm about to throw a pillow at her. The Ukrainians do a video with a Ukrainian soldier, like his face covered, and his name is Captain Highmars. Highmars are the weapon system that the Americans have given the Ukrainians, that they're doing such a good job of firing the rockets and blowing up Russian, just this weekend, right? Blowing up the Russian barracks this weekend. Thank you, Yorub. So the Ukrainians did a video here from Captain Highmars, and this is the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense's Twitter account, which is what's amazing. And the video, I'm going to download it now. Hang on. I'm going to download it and I'll show you. The video is a Ukrainian soldier who is basically saying, I'll show you what he's. Oh, actually, I may have to translate this for you. Actually, I will translate this for you. Here, I'm going to start it, and then I'll read it to you. Russian soldier. My name is Captain Highmars. I am your chance to come home alive. Give me the coordinates of the places where the armored vehicles are concentrated, and headquarters and ammunition are located. And I will not hit your quarters. I will destroy only tanks, artillery shells, and fuel. Then no one will send you on the attack to the slaughter. This is how you save your life and the lives of your friends. I mean, Now the best part, to some degree, is listen to the guy's voice. They basically, they digitally altered his voice in the way you might do to protect someone, to hide his identity, except in this case, the digital alteration of his voice makes him sound like a monster, right? Because it's that voice. It's almost like a Darth Vader type voice. It is, and he's standing there, legs spread, cool military outfit, the helmet and just the eyes showing, I am Captain Highmars. And the Highmars, that was a Highmars behind him shooting off. Oh my God. I mean, but the best part was that he's basically saying, he says, if you tell me the locations of all of these coordinates, of the artillery, of the vehicles, of the headquarters, I will not go after your barracks. And he throws this in, he goes, and you won't have to go to war. Meaning, if you tell me where the stuff is and I blow it up, there's no way for them to send you there, right? Because the weapons will be destroyed, the vehicles will be destroyed, everyone will be destroyed, and there's no way for them to send you. Nope. No? Okay. Mom's trying to come in. All right. Oh, they're all there by the table. Yep. So anyway, I thought that was rather brilliant. What we've got here, let me see here. Oh, Poland, really, you know what? I don't want to do too many long stories here today. Poland is going to be buying more U.S. tanks. Let me see, $1.4 billion deal makes Poland the first U.S. ally in Europe to procure American Abrams tanks. So they're going to be getting those over the next year, 2023. Obviously, part of the defense against Russia. I'm looking here. I'm going to jump ahead here. I've got maybe two quick stories here. One is the Ukrainian Intelligence Directorate is saying that listen to this, Russian partisans, Russian citizens have been sabotaging Russian railways. They committed how many acts of sabotage? Last year, 40 cases were recorded of sabotage, and they're sabotaging the Russian railways so that the railways can't be used to transport troops and equipment and all this kind of stuff, right? These are allegedly Russians attacking Russian railways. The other thing is so what just happened, they've stopped the movement of civilian trains and military convoys on the Trans-Siberian Railway in Krasnoyarsk. Krasnoyarsk is way in Siberia. Krasnoyarsk was a famous anti-missile radar system, etc., that was in eastern Russia, very famous back in the arms control day. So they think it's Russian civilians doing it, which is kind of wild. So, all right, I'm going to stop with that. I will tell you really quick too, we've got a Discord as well. You can find my Discord at discord.aravosis.com. But just like I was telling the TikTokers, you can always just go to my profile on TikTok and you'll see the URL, the link there that says Linktree. Click it, and my Discord's there, my Patreon's there, everything's there. For the rest of you, aravosis.com will give you all of my links. But the Discord, what we'll do tonight on the Discord, we did this last night too. After the show is over, since I really prefer to have the show just be about Ukraine, after the show is over, I know a lot of folks who follow American news, either Americans or if any of the rest of you around the world are following the American news, there's been a lot of wild stuff going on with the Congress. They're trying to have votes to establish the speaker who's going to be the top person running the House of Representatives, and it's been a disaster for Republicans. Today was another day of disaster votes. I will go to the Discord afterwards at 7 p.m. Eastern, so in 15 minutes, we'll go to the Discord, and we will I will talk about it. I'll talk with you about it. It's discord.aravosis.com. Discord isn't always the easiest to use. I will say if you're new, if you've been there before, it's easy. Once you join, go to the left, go down, look at John's you'll see John's after show as one of the voice channels. So go check it out. All right, let's do questions. You guys can submit questions, as I said, at the bottom of the screen here on YouTube, on TikTok. You can, one of the easiest ways is to use the Q&A link that's in my profile on TikTok, and I'm going to pull up your questions. And please do keep the gifts coming, because that's how I support. I've got Captain Highmars talking here, but please do keep the gifts coming as well on TikTok and YouTube if you would. I appreciate it, guys. Here we go, Q&A. Hang on here. Was Russia already occupying portions in eastern Ukraine when they did the big invasion? Yes, kind of. Yes. Oh, I see you, Ben and Jake. Appreciate that. I don't have the exactness on thank you, Addie, for those. And thank you, user 5910 for that as well. Those were both very cute. I like turned for my map and I was like, oh, I'm wearing a hat and a crown. In eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. Luhansk is here. Donetsk is here. The combined area is called Donbass. It's an area the Russians have coveted for a very long time. Okay. And in 2014, when the Russians invaded and stole Crimea, they also basically, I'm not even sure what word to use because people unfortunately refer to this as a civil war, and it wasn't a civil war. It's not a civil war. The Russians came in and paid people. They sent their own troops there, and they paid local traders to basically foment trouble and say, we want to be independent, when really not that many people wanted to be independent. They wanted, they're Ukrainians, and even if they speak Russian, they wanted to be part of Ukraine. But the Russians wanted to create the appearance of this separatist movement because then the Russians could give them weapons. Remember, by the way, 2014, Eastern Ukraine in 2014 is where the Russians put an anti-aircraft battery. And what did the anti-aircraft battery, which was manned by a Russian, what did the anti-aircraft battery do? It shot down the, was it MH217? I'm forgetting the name of the airliner. Somebody, just because I'd like to, honor their memory by actually naming the correct flight. But it was a civilian airliner that was flying over Ukraine, and the Russians blew it up and killed everybody on board. I'm talking MH17. Was that MH17 or no, 17 was the other one. Was it 17? Okay, people are saying MH17. Okay, MH17. I want to say, was it 298 dead? It was a horrific number of people dead. Horrific. It was Malaysian airliner. I thought it was. Yeah, because they've had a lot of bad luck with a Malaysian airliner. Jesus. Okay, it was Malaysian. That was over eastern Ukraine. That was over territory that the Russians were, I mean, if you want to call it occupying, it kind of depends. But that's what's going on. Yeah, that's what was going on over there. Let me see here from Ben. Hey, Ben, do you think NATO countries giving armored fighting vehicles such as tanks, etc., is a sign that NATO is seeing through Russia's threats of escalation? Yes, it is going slowly, but absolutely. Hang on, quick sip of water here. There is no way that NATO would be slowly giving better and better weapons, such as, okay, the Highmars. The Highmars was, I don't even like using the word escalation. Russia claims it's escalation. I don't think it's escalation. But nonetheless, from my lips here, the U.S. decided it was safe enough to give Highmars to the Ukrainians. And the Highmars are the rocket system where the Ukrainians have had incredible success, including this weekend, killing several hundred Russian troops with one attack on a building the Russian troops were in over New Year's. So that was definitely the U.S. stepping up another level of weapon support. The Russians did nothing in response. We gave the Ukrainians, we are now going to give them a Patriot missile battery, which is an anti-missile battery for shooting down missiles that are coming into Ukraine, right? Which is what the Russians are doing nonstop. Thank you, Evolving Fate, for the galaxy there. What did the Russians do in response? They threatened, they didn't do anything, right? Now what's going on? The French are going to be sending a light tank to Ukraine. Big deal, very important. And what are the Russians doing? Let's see. It just got announced today. My guess is the problem the Russians have here is there isn't much they can do other than use nuclear weapons. And what the Russians have realized, which I suspected they would realize early on, I've been saying it, you can't use nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are really good for threatening, but that's all they're good for. They're not good for anything else, right? I mean, as we've talked about before, literally using nuclear weapons in Ukraine, all the defense experts have said there's no military benefit to doing it. So, it's not clear why Russia would do it. It literally isn't going to help them win the war. They may think it's going to piss off. It will piss off the Ukrainians. The Russians may think, oh, if we use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, then the Ukrainians will give up. as I've said before, does anybody think the Ukrainians are ever going to give up? And especially if Russia used a nuke, I think the Ukrainians would be apoplectic. They would be 100 times more vicious in fighting the Russians if the Russians used a nuke. So there's no way that they're going to use nukes. In any case, so yes, I'm sorry. So the main point here was each time NATO has given better weapons, the Russians haven't done anything, and it's a calculated risk, meaning hoping the Russians won't do anything, but it also means it's an analysis and a calculation NATO did each time that they can give better weapons and the Russians won't do anything in response, other than, send more missiles to Ukraine. But oh well, right? So yeah, I think that's the case. Oh, thank you, Jake. Okay, appreciate it. I didn't see that was just a comment, Jake, and not a and not a thing. Thank you for that. What else we got here, guys? And now I'm happy to have a discussion on the French tanks as well. I know we got into there was some discussion on TikTok and YouTube about some of the details of what the French were sending, whether it was a big deal or not, and all of that. But let me see here. Ginger is saying, as the war inches towards the 1 year mark, which is actually true, the Russians invaded February 24th. So we're 10 and a half months now. Do you think we'll see more NATO support? I think we are seeing slowly more NATO support. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to see it go slowly like that. I'm not convinced we're going to see it. All of a sudden, NATO finds God and says, oh my God, we've got to give better weapons. I think, unfortunately, it's this very gradual thing. Now, I will say this. One theory I had recently on all of this was, and this is not a recent theory, I've said repeatedly, NATO doesn't want Russia to win. They say Russia cannot win. Hey, Frank, how are you? Went to school with my friend Frank here, who's weighing in from Facebook. NATO does not want Russia to win. They think it's incredibly dangerous if Russia wins. But NATO doesn't want Ukraine to win, because if Ukraine wins, they're afraid what Russia will do. Will Russia use nuclear weapons? Who knows, right? So NATO wants a tie, but they want a tie where Ukraine's able to get back a lot of its territory. Thank you, Brian, for the heart there. They want Ukraine to get back a lot of territory, but, and I'm telling you, this is what I think the thinking is among the NATO, certainly Biden, France, and Germany, I think, okay? UK, I think UK is fine. But France, Germany, and Biden, not so good. They want Ukraine to do well enough to get a lot of land back, but not all of it. They really don't want Ukraine to get Crimea because that'll make Putin mad. And they don't want the Russians to win, but they don't want Ukraine to totally win either. They want both sides to finally accept that they can't win. Thank you, Paramarine. Appreciate it. They want both sides to accept that they can't win so that both sides are willing to negotiate in earnestness, right? The problem is, as long as the Russians are insistent on taking all of Ukraine, which they still are, as long as the Russians are insistent on just destroying Ukraine, then that means the Russians, for the foreseeable future, are in no position to negotiate. And if the Russians are clearly not interested in negotiating, then NATO knows it's got to keep supporting Ukraine, because remember, one of our two rules, Russia cannot win this war. But we don't want Ukraine to win either, but we really don't want Russia to win. So if Russia keeps acting like it's going to win, NATO's going to keep helping. So unfortunately, what I think would give Ukraine better weapons is if Ukraine starts not doing as well. Then NATO might step in and start giving better weapons. Thank you, Pesci, although I really don't want Ukraine to not be doing well. But it's a very weird dance that we're doing there. And basically, Biden doesn't want to piss off Putin. And I think, at this point, give them what they need. Give them what they need. What else we got here? Any news on Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant? Yeah, there's been a little news. I mean, the UN had been negotiating with Russia to try to get the Zaporizhzhia plant be declared like independent territory where there'd be no fighting or anything like this. The latest I saw was the UN claimed the talks were advancing, and then we haven't heard anything for a week or two. Ukraine came out today and said that they want, I don't remember if it was, I think it was UN troops, they said, at the Zaporizhzhia plant, or maybe at the nuclear plants in general around the country, in order to stop the Russians from attacking them. Now, that can't, UN troops, United Nations troops can't go, because you'd need the United Nations Security Council, I'm pretty sure, to approve that, and Russia's on the Security Council, and Russia will veto it. So there's no news other than supposedly NATO was negotiating with Russia, but I don't see any reason why Russia would okay making the plants, like, no, what do you want to call it? No combat zones, because Russia wants to keep scaring everybody. They want all of us to worry that the nuclear plants might blow up, because they want Europeans that are nearby to say, well, these nuclear plants, Russia keeps bombing them. What if they blow up? Maybe this war just isn't worth it, right? So we put more pressure on Ukraine to stop the war. Now, I would argue the opposite. Maybe this war just isn't worth it, so we need to give Ukraine better weapons so the war ends quickly. That would be my answer to that. Oh, here we go. Elise, I'm sorry. Hello, Elise. Thank you for that. The last Russian airstrikes have been mainly drones. Yes. Are they running out of expensive missiles? Yes. Or maybe just seeing that the lights are still mostly on, so it's not worth using up their missiles. I'm sure there's some of the latter going on, because it's certainly cheaper to use drones. I was just seeing today, actually, the Iranian drones cost something like $20,000 a drone. I don't know what a Russian missile costs, but I guarantee you it costs a hell of a lot more than $20,000. Actually, I know how much they cost. The S-300, which are the anti-aircraft missiles, or the anti-missile missiles that the Ukrainians are using, cost, I believe the number I saw today was $150,000 or $175,000 a missile. Okay. Whereas the drone is $20,000. The Russians are using those S-300s as missiles to attack buildings, which isn't usually done. They're missiles against things in the air, but the Russians are, since they're getting low on their really expensive missiles, they're using these, but these are still $175,000 missiles or something like that, right? So they're not nothing. But I was reading today that yes, the number of drones being used by the Russians, and it's almost exclusively drones, is evidence of the fact that they just don't have that many more guided missiles, cruise missiles, things like that. I read yet again today that the Russians have enough of their expensive missiles to do 2 more attacks of 80 missiles or more in one night, but that's it. So that's where they're doing the drones. And if you're the Russians too, you're thinking, well, we need to have something to escalate with. For example, remember the Russians got all pissed off that the Ukrainians had attacked the Kerch Bridge, the bridge in the south between Crimea and Russia. When somebody blew up the bridge, we assume Ukrainians, but who the hell knows? Somebody blew up the bridge. The Russians assumed it was the Ukrainians, and the Russians launched, massive air attack on the Ukrainians. So, yeah. I suspect they're trying to save some of their best for last, but we know they're running out. Yeah. Otanbot is saying the French, who I think is in Norway, the French decision to send armored fighting vehicles to Ukraine may encourage other NATO countries to follow suit. Exactly. The number of vehicles sent will be a significant factor in this regard. The AMX-10, which is the name of the light tank, top speed of 60 kilometers an hour, which we said was 37 miles an hour, will allow for a more mobile and dynamic Ukrainian defense. Yeah, I mean, the stuff I was reading was saying they're good. They're good vehicles. Like they'll be. I believe also I read that some of the weapons they've got on these light tanks can be quite effective against Russian tanks. And because they've got like 6 wheels rather than just the treads, they're very maneuverable. I was also reading, get a little geeky here, but some of the wheels are independently maneuverable. So like, it's not like all the wheels turn at once. It's a whole, you can do it. Bottom line is it makes them super maneuverable and all sorts of crazy land. So yeah, big deal there. We're almost hitting 6 o'clock here. We'll try to do a couple more here. France is the first Western country to provide light tanks. It is true, Franck. You are correct. Will be interesting to see what the other NATO countries will kick in. Well, and that is what people are hoping, is that by France providing these light tanks to Ukraine, they've now basically opened the floodgates not just opened the floodgates to other countries doing it, but they've made it okay for other countries to do it because France has done it. In other words, it's one of those things. What was the phrase that everyone, I've heard this expression years ago, and I really liked it in politics, but everyone is in a race to be second, right? Everyone is in a race to be second. And that's sort of the issue here, is that no country wants to be the first to give the planes, to give the tanks, etc., but they don't mind being second. They want somebody else to take the heat for doing it. So France is taking the heat if there is any heat, and then we go from there. Deep. Yeah, I think that's true, Marius. Yeah, I mean, it depends. Marius is saying about the Ukraine versus Russia, and I've been saying that I think the Americans, French, and the Germans are a little freaked out that they're afraid of Ukraine really winning, even though they don't want Russia to win. Marius is saying, I don't think it's about win or lose. It has to be a slow win to avoid uniting and motivating the Russian people. I don't think that's totally untrue. I would agree with you. I think part of it too is I still don't think in the end we want, for example, I will guarantee you Biden does not want Ukraine going after Crimea. I would guarantee you. It's just my gut, but I think. But I do think as well, Biden thinks that it's the old adage about the pot, putting a frog in a pot and turning the heat, putting a frog in a pot of cold water, and you turn the heat on so the pot slowly gets warmer and warmer. And the story, whether it's true or not, the story is that the frog won't realize how hot the water is getting until it's too late and it boils, right? It's sort of the same idea here, that we slowly give Ukraine better weapons. We slowly give them more weapons, right? Then we give them the Highmars, one Highmars. Russia doesn't really do anything. Then remember, we gave them a couple. Now they've got 20 Highmars, right? Then we say we're going to give them Patriot missiles. As I said, Russia doesn't do anything, but we're only giving them one Patriot missile battery to start with. Then the French say they're going to give light tanks. So there's this slowly, whereas who knows? And I will say it's not an unfair argument. I can see some merit in the argument that it is calling their bluff, but it's doing it so gradually that it's making it hard for the Russians to respond. Because if one day we announced Highmars, light tanks, Patriot missiles, and all sorts of things at once, the Russians could possibly use it or feel that they have no choice but to respond in some horrific way, because we've announced too much and they've got to save face. Now, one missile battery, right? Some tanks from France. None of it's enough to really justify the Russians going crazy, but it still slowly makes things better for Ukraine. Again, I see pluses and minuses to that strategy because the Ukrainians are still getting killed while this is slowly getting better. But it's a fair point, Marius. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. All right, guys, it's 2 after. Oh, sorry, we got another one from Ben here. Any news on that Russian ship that got sent into the Atlantic with hypersonic missiles? I mean, no news. I had it actually as one of the stories, and then I just kind of ignored it because I was like, I didn't think there was enough news here. Hang on. It was the last story on my list. So according to the New York Times, President Putin on Wednesday, I'm reading from the Times here, sent a frigate on a mission to the Atlantic Ocean that he said was equipped with hypersonic weapons. Hypersonic weapons can go 5 times the speed of sound and evade traditional anti-aircraft weapons. But the Times raised the question, and they can even be nuclear tipped. They can put nuclear weapons on them. But the Times raised the question. It was funny. I'm reading this article and I started thinking this myself, and I love that the Times brought it up too. Do these weapons even work? Nobody knows if they work. And I got news for you. Considering how bad everything else has been in Ukraine for the Russians, do we really believe that some new super duper missile system they've got that we haven't really seen works? Right? I would also add that, so what? I mean, if these missiles have nuclear missiles, the Russians can't use them. They can't use them. I mean, what? They're going to use nuclear missiles against us that go really fast and we can't shoot them down. Okay. I got news for you. It's very hard to shoot Russian missiles down anyway. If the Russians shoot an ICBM, the ones that go really high into the stratosphere and come down and land and kill us all, we can't shoot those down. So what does this do in a nuclear sense? Doesn't give the Russians that much of an advantage. I can't see it. But also in a nuclear sense, so what? The Russians throw a nuke at us 5 times faster or 10 times faster. Okay. And if they do that, we will respond with our nuclear submarines and we'll wipe Russia off the map. And the Russians know it, and it's why they won't do it. And it's also why we will not be attacking Russia with nukes either, because Russia would use its submarines to wipe us off the map. So, I hear about this in a conventional war. If this weapon system works in a conventional war, it'd be useful for the Russians. Yeah, right? Because it would be harder for us to shoot down the missiles. But and if they use them in Ukraine, it'd be more useful to the Russians. But A, do they work? And B, how many do they really have? I can't believe they've got that many. I just have a hard time believing they've even got them. I mean, yeah. So, sorry, looking at people kind of weighing in here. They did some tests, but according to what the New York Times was saying, it's not really clear that these things work yet. It's just not clear that they work. That's what the Times was saying, at least. So, yep. Super chat, Ben. That's what I've got for Ben right there, Roisin. And I think we are caught up on the super chats, right? All right, we are caught up. Okay, guys, I'm going to skip the summary again because I think whenever I do the recap, the TikTok followers drop in half. And I will tell you the truth. I've been told that's really bad for the algorithm, and we do not want our TikTok algorithm to be bad. When it sees everybody drop off, it tells the system that like the end of my show is boring or something, and we want to keep the algorithm happy. So no more recaps. You can watch the show otherwise. I'm going to go over to the Discord, and we will talk for 10 or 15 minutes or so about the latest news from America with the House of Representatives and the battle that's been going on there, and the votes have been just crazy. The Republicans are having a very bad time. So come on over to Discord, discord.erevosis.com, and we will discuss the latest. Thank you, Benji, for that. We will discuss the latest on the votes in Congress and where it looks like it's heading. Okay. All right. Let's go over there, guys. Discord.erevosis.com. And otherwise, I will see you tomorrow night, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. All righty. All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Head over to Discord.